Hello everyone and welcome to Facts Only. As promised from the previous video, I'm going to read again through the conference report of 2014, starting from chapter 1, of course. So without wasting our time, let me just get to it. Chapter 1, Introduction, Agitations for National Conference, a Historical Overview. Background. The Federal Republic Nigeria, with a population of approximately 170 million, located in West Africa, has 36 states, 774 local government areas, and the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja. The country has had a history of national dialogue that has impacted on its constitutional and political development in different phases of the 100 years of Nigeria as a nation, from the amalgamation of the Northern and Southern Protectorates on January 1, 1914, to the convocation of a national conference in March 2014. The nature, character, and prospects of national conferences have been turning points in the history of the country. Each phase has had a defining moment as a result of the issues, demands, struggles, and movements peculiar to it. The history of constitutional and political development has shown that conferences for nation building can be classified into three: constitutional, national (non-sovereign), and sovereign. A constitutional conference is concerned with the sole aim of developing a constitutional framework or making proposals for constitutional changes within the existing constitutional framework. It has limited scope. Constitution making for the purpose of nation building, through which the rules and principles of political pluralism, the role of the state, citizenship rights and duties, protection of fundamental human rights, etc. are defined. A national conference is a formal platform for dialogue by constituent units of the nation convened by the national government of a country to discuss issues or problems that inhibit national progress or challenge national cohesion. Just defining what a national conference is. A national conference is expected to prefer appropriate solutions that will assist in moving the nation forward. A sovereign national conference is the convocation of, by and large, civil society organizations, workers' unions, political parties, professional associations, religious denominations, and government representatives to discuss and chart new ways forward for the nation. As the word sovereign suggests, the conference is not subject to the authority of the state, and its outcome may supplant and sweep away existing order while heralding an entirely new order. It has the capacity to take effective and effectual decisions relating to the tenure, survival, and/or limits of power of the existing regime. This means that a sovereign national conference is interpreted as a transitional phase in the process of a mass struggle to carry out system or regime change. The situation which leads to the convocation of a sovereign national conference arises from the thinking that the existing order or regime is incapable of solving economic and political problems, and the institutions of the state are rather weak or ineffective to assert authority, while the democratic opposition is not strong enough to effect regime or system change, as we have always witnessed in Nigeria, right? The opposition is just there by name. In many cases, the opposition is working hand in hand with the ruling party, and nobody is really doing any check and balance, right? So if you have such a country, or if you are in such a state, then the onus is now on the citizens and the few other people in the institutions that still want to uphold their integrity and speak the truth. So let's go on. Where the convocation of a sovereign national conference is unlikely, its proponents have advocated a conference of ethnic nationalities, particularly in an ethnically plural society. Representatives of the ethnic nationalities are convened on a common platform to discuss and make recommendations to government about their common problems in order to achieve higher levels of mutual trust, understanding, and integration in nation building. The nature and character, relevance, and legitimacy of the three types of national dialogue depend on the context, especially the political situation in any country, and the considerations concerning future political development. Generally, a national dialogue assists in creating environments of high trust and openness, with reflective and generative capacities for problem solving, action planning, and conflict resolution for the development of the society. It should be recalled that the creation of the Kingdom of Great Britain on May 1, 1707, to include Wales and the Kingdom of Scotland, was the outcome of a national dialogue which involved the constituent parts of the new political union. This creation was the result of the Treaty of Union of July 22, 1706, which was ratified by both the Parliament of England and the Parliament of Scotland, which passed an Act of Union in 1707. The legislative structures of both territories were responsible for the formalization of the amalgamation. That is their own amalgamation now, right? They held their own conference that resulted in the amalgamation of Wales and Scotland with Great Britain. The United States First and Second Congresses in 1774 and 1775 respectively also held national dialogues to address issues related to their political development. The Nigerian experience in the agitation for national conference began after amalgamation in January 1914. For this reason, this chapter is divided into 6 subthemes, which mirror the agitation for national conference. 1914 to 1945, amalgamation and the problem of nationhood. 1945 to 1960, decolonization and the agitation for constitutional reform and independence. 1960 to 1966, early years of independence. 1966 to 1999, military regimes and the movement for democratization. 1999 to 2014, democratic rule and the agitation for sovereign national conference. Starting with theme 1 now, amalgamation and the problem of nationhood. Nigerians under colonial rule were confronted with the task of building a new nation created by the British. The 1914 amalgamation of the Northern and Southern Protectorates that created the Nigerian nation was a British colonial initiative. This provoked bitter controversy at the time, arousing the resentment of educated elite and of some British administrators. A number of issues had agitated the early Nigerian nationalists. First, in spite of the amalgamation, colonial administration recognized the two areas as autonomous parts and administered the territories separately. Second, the educated elites were excluded from colonial administration. Early Nigerian nationalists began to advocate for a national dialogue to discuss the future political development of the amalgamated territories as a single and unified Nigerian nation. They also demanded for participation in the management of their own affairs. The agitation of the early Nigerian nationalists did not receive positive attention from the British colonialists. I wish they would just list those so-called early Nigerian nationalists, like the very figures of these so-called early Nigerian nationalists, so that we can just have a quick picture of them. Anyway, but it's something you can get from other sources, but I'm just saying specifically in this book. At the end of okay, let's start again. The agitation of the early Nigerian nationalists did not receive positive attention from the British colonialists. At the end of the First World War in 1918, representatives from the 4 British colonies in West Africa, namely Nigeria, Gold Coast, now Ghana, Sierra Leone, and the Gambia, organized the National Congress of British West Africa and held a conference in Accra in 1920. It's interesting that the conference that was organized was named as British West Africa, and I wonder if it has stopped being so till today. Anyway, the sub-regional conference urged the British to lay the basis for future self-determination and demanded for a legislative council in each territory, half of whose members should be elected Africans, African veto over taxation, separation of the judiciary from the legislative arm of government, appointment and deposition of chiefs by their own people, abolition of racial discrimination in the civil service, development of municipal government, repeal of certain obnoxious ordinances, and the establishment of a university in West Africa. Isn't it interesting that part of their agitations back then was the abolition of racial discrimination in the civil service? So you have people that invaded your own space, right? Took over you by whatever means they used, established a government over you, recruited themselves in that government, and didn't allow you to be part of it. So this is the kind of politics that they introduce to us. Politics of polarization. And unfortunately, most of the traitors called politicians in Africa, and in particular Nigeria, have actually absorbed this kind of evil, because it is evil to be playing people along different lines while stealing from them. Right. And this is why we are here today, to continue to educate ourselves that it is time to start looking beyond our differences, such as religion or the language we speak, and start working on what binds us together as a people. Start fighting for our own common interests, because the truth is that a few people are sitting down on the Nigerian resources enjoying themselves, while a large number of people are in abject poverty. That is not normal. That is not normal. And until we begin to wake up that just because someone from your own ethnic background sits in a seat of power does not in any way make you rich. You will still need to struggle for your own life to make it. Okay? It may help a few people, but it will not help the majority of the people. And we need to start looking beyond this. And this is one of the reasons that, for me, I just want to read so that we begin to understand where we are coming from and where we are heading. And the thing is, where we are heading is not good. And if we don't begin to do something now to correct it, we are doomed. Let's move on. This is where we are now. The agitation of the early Nigerian nationalists did not receive positive official attention because they were not only considered to be the source of political agitation, but the British imperialists feared that their aspiration to greater participation in government had the ultimate aim of displacing British administration. As a result of the Accra Conference of 1920, the British introduced a new constitution known as the Sir Hugh Clifford Constitution in 1922. The constitution established a legislative council and introduced elective representation. This led to the formation of the first Nigerian political party, the Nigerian National Democratic Party, NNDP, in 1923, led by Herbert Macaulay. So, Herbert Macaulay was a Nigerian, despite the English or British sounding name. Actually, I think it is better that a figure like this, we quickly highlight his background, not diving too deep, because he actually has a very long name, which I would quickly want to call out here for our audience. His full names are Olayinka Herbert Samuel Hillas Badmus Macaulay. He was a Nigerian nationalist, politician, surveyor, engineer, architect, journalist, and musician, and was considered by many, or is considered by many, as founder of Nigerian nationalism. He was born on 14 November 1864 in Lagos Colony, of course, and died 7 May 1946 at the age of 81 in Lagos, called back then British Nigeria. His resting place is said to be Ikoyi Cemetery, and of course his nationality is Nigerian, and he was also a citizen of Nigeria. Just a quick background about him, right? So let's go on. The party articulated nationalist issues, which included the economic development of the natural resources of the country under controlled private enterprise and the Africanization of the civil service. So the British were exploiting our resources, right? And it was under the control of a private enterprise. However, Northern Nigeria was excluded from the jurisdiction of the Legislative Council and was administered by the issuance of proclamations by the governor until the introduction of a new constitution at the end of the Second World War in 1945. In the 1930s and up to the end of the Second World War, Nigerian nationalists continued their agitation for a national dialogue, for the political restructuring of the country. The advocates of a national dialogue urged that the act of amalgamation was not a federal idea, but that there were strong integrative factors of intergroup relations that favored the division of the country into a number of units that could develop into components of a future federation. The nationalists argued that a federal system would enhance national unity and integration of the component parts of the country, and agitated for the inclusion of the northern provinces in the Legislative Council. While the colonial government did not convene a national conference prior to the introduction of a new constitution, nevertheless, the country was divided into three regions in 1939: the northern, western, and eastern regions. This was a fundamental and major step in restructuring. Interesting, isn't it? So let's continue to theme 2. decolonization and agitation for constitutional reform and independence. In the different phases of the era of decolonization from 1945 to the attainment of independence in 1960, Nigerians agitated for constitutional conference, self-government, and the granting of independence on the 6th of December 1944. Sir Arthur Richards, who was the governor of Nigeria, had in a dispatch to London stated clearly that the problem of Nigeria was how to create a political system that would advance political development in line with the interest being pursued by various Nigerian groups. In March 1945, the constitutional proposals were embodied in a white paper published in the United Kingdom and Nigeria, and this was submitted to the Legislative Council on the 22nd of that month. Nigerian nationalists agitated for a constitutional conference for the discussion of the proposals on the grounds that the Nigerian representatives in the council were overpersuaded by the benign atmosphere of colonial domination. Following this agitation, a storm of criticism arose in the nationalist press over the demand for self-government. In 1946, the Arthur Richards Constitution was introduced. At the time, Nigerian nationalists were already demanding immediate full self-government. From the time the Constitution came into effect in 1947, wartime developments have affected the nationalist struggle. The nationalist movement had become a powerful force, capable of questioning in action and as well as in words the constitutional, administrative, and economic assumptions of the British authority. Nigerian nationalists were opposed to the Constitution, partly because of its content and also because of the way in which it was introduced. In 1947, I don't know why I continue to call 1940. In 1947, the 3 elected representatives in the Legislative Council from Lagos boycotted the first session of the council. And when they resumed sitting in 1948, they began to demand for quicker constitutional changes. The Richards Constitution was designed to last for 9 years. Sir Arthur Richards made the mistake of not consulting the opinion of Nigerians over his constitutional proposals and found himself faced with a spate of bitter criticism from the nationalists. So how do you draft a constitution for a group of people without their consultation? The audacity, right? For me, I don't think it was just a mistake, though. I have the feeling that it was a deliberate act anyway, if you understand the way these people play their politics. On August 28, 1949, Sir John Macpherson took over as the governor of Nigeria. Still, no indigenous person, you know. In that same year, the colonial government took the initiatives in launching constitutional discussions. A select committee of the Legislative Council made recommendations to the governor regarding the steps to be taken for a review of the Richards Constitution, with special reference to the measures to be adopted for ascertaining the views of all sections of the population on the issues involved. As Nigerian nationalists continue the agitation for a national constitutional conference, Governor Macpherson adopted a policy of allowing Nigerians at every level to participate in putting forward suggestions for the country's constitution through a series of discussions held first at the village, then in the district, followed by provincial, regional, and national conferences. After collating views from the grassroots, the various provincial conferences made recommendations which were considered by regional conferences. The views of the regional conferences were then considered by a drafting committee and followed by the General Constitutional Conference held in Ibadan in January 1950. The Constitutional Conference at Ibadan made recommendations with 4 minority reports attached, which were put before the regional houses and the Legislative Council. The outcome of the Constitution review was the 1951 constitutional arrangement known as the 1951 Macpherson Constitution. Because it came into being after an unprecedented process of consultation with the peoples of Nigeria as a whole, the Constitution granted some concessions to the nationalist agitation in that it offered a measure of responsible government and not self-government to Nigerian nationalist leaders. The battle still continues. From 1953, the tempo and intensity of political agitation sharply increased. The nationalists argued that because of the structural weaknesses and manifest deficiencies of the Constitution, they were determined to drastically review it, or in the alternative, it should be the last colonial constitution prescribing a dependent status for Nigeria. Although the constitution was to expire in 5 years, a motion was moved by Chief Anthony Enahoro of the Action Group in the House of Representatives on March 31, 1953, calling for the attainment of self-government in 1956. Although northern legislators were not opposed to the motion, they felt that the demand was too early. A critical fallout from the debate on self-government was a walkout from the parliament and resignations of some ministers. This led to a constitutional crisis and the threats of disintegration of the country. Following the crisis over the self-government motion, the colonial secretary, Oliver Littleton, convened a constitutional conference in London from July 30 to August 22, 1953, to revise the 1951 Constitution. At the conference, a federal constitution was accepted by the leaders of the main political parties, and it was agreed that regions which so requested should have full internal self-government in 1956. The work of the conference was completed by a further conference in Lagos from January to February 1954. The outcome of the 1953 Constitutional Conference and the resumed Lagos Conference in 1954 established the Federal (Littleton) Constitution of 1954. Federalism had been advocated at the 1950 Ibadan General Conference on Constitution Review but was rejected. After the 1953 crisis, federalism was adopted as the solution to the political problems of the country. Interesting, isn't it? The attainment of independence by Ghana on March 6, 1957 spurred Nigerian nationalists to take a fresh and bolder look at the political future of the country. Nowadays, if something positive is happening in the neighboring country, will they even care to look in the mirror? At least in the past, they did look in the mirror, right? On March 26, 1957, a motion was unanimously passed in the House of Representatives setting 1959 as the year of independence for Nigeria within the British Commonwealth. This Commonwealth that exists till today, I think we need to really understand what are the terms and conditions of this so-called Commonwealth, because I don't see any wealth between the former colony of Britain and that of Britain. There's nothing common. The delegates to the Nigerian Constitutional Conference in May and June 1957 in London were mandated to actualize the agitation. Nigerian leaders were at last united on an issue which for 6 years had not only plagued all internal relationships but had also threatened the very existence of Nigeria as an emergent national entity. Don't we still witness this till today? Don't we still witness this till today, my people? Strengthened with this new spirit of unity and common purpose, the leaders of the Nigerian delegation to the Constitutional Conference presented a joint memorandum requesting the British government to grant the country independence in 1959. But the colonial secretary, Mr. Lennox Boyd, did not favor the request. That notwithstanding, the Nigerian delegates still pressed further their demand for self-government, not later than April 2, 1966. At the conference, the western and eastern regions were granted full internal self-government in 1957. I think it is better to stop here today because I have already read for more than half an hour. I don't want to overload you with this. 30 minutes is too long of a time to listen to reading, but I hope you enjoyed it up to this moment, and we shall continue from where we stopped in our next video. Thank you very much for listening, and please, if you know that you enjoyed it, share with the people that also loves to read and understand the historical background of our country, so that we can begin to heal and hold people in power accountable irrespective of their ethnic or religious background, because that's the only way we can all enjoy our resources. Anything short of that, we will continue to be poor, while the people we are fighting for, right, to be in power, and their children will continue to enjoy, and of course together with their external collaborators. So stay tuned, and please come back to this channel for the remainder of the reading. Stay blessed.